IEBC to be able to perform its constitutional and legal mandates in the management of our electoral affairs and boundary delimitation matters. So I am indeed very pleased to be here because this is a national duty. And I hope in the next 2 hours or so, I'll be able to tell you about myself and why I did apply or express interest to be chairman of the IEBC. And hopefully from there we can have more interactive dialogue so that you can find more about me. Mr. Chairman, allow me to introduce myself. I am Erastus doing locale ethicon, as you may have seen from my application or documents submitted to you. I come from Turkana County, which is in the far north part of this country. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya of more than 17 years standing. I am also, Mr. Chairman, a practitioner in the field of conflict prevention, peace building, at a level of professional level, with the degrees to back it up. Thirdly, Mr. Chairman, I am also a professional in the field of project management. And I have shared with you the qualifications in that, in that regard. Mr. Chairman, I come before this panel as a Kenyan, and a Kenyan from the north, who is passionate, who is committed, and who is consistent to contribute to our national building duty, because I look at Kenya as a project, as an ongoing project that calls upon all patriotic citizens who have various skills, who have various competencies and skills, and that they are therefore called upon to participate in building Kenya. As you are aware, the chairman and distinguished panels, Kenya is a country that is going through democratization. And electoral processes, electoral management is one of those important duties that we as Kenyans must manage. And therefore, I come here well aware of the kind of institution or the kind of duties, the kind of mandates that a chairperson of the IEBC is required to undertake. So, having looked at my professional and academic career, I felt that I think I possess the relevant academic qualifications and the relevant work experience that is necessary or that will be helpful to the management of the IEBC. Number one, Mr. Chair, I am one of those professionals that possesses multiple academic qualifications, having studied law at the University of Nairobi, where I obtained a bachelor's degree, second class upper division honors. I followed that with qualifications at the Kenya School of Law, where I obtained a postgraduate diploma in law, whereupon I was thereafter in 2003, I was admitted to the bar, to the role of advocates of the High Court of Kenya, to commence my journey as a legal practitioner, as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Later on, not necessarily in the order of chronology, later on, Mr. Chair, I followed up my legal qualifications with a specialized certificate in implementation of the international human rights treaties at the University of Nottingham in the UK. And this was through the Chevening, what they call the Chevening Fellowship by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So I'm a Chevening fellow or scholar in that respect. And then with having done that, I also made sure that I later on did a master's in law at the University of Derby in the UK. And in that regard, I deviated a little bit from the issues of human rights, governance. I focused more on issues of transnational oil, gas, and energy law. And again, distinguished panel, this was in recognition of the fact that Kenya was also going through, by 2012, we had also discovered oil reserves, so I needed to have some knowledge on how that field works. So that's, in a nutshell, my journey around acquiring legal qualifications, both in Kenya and outside Kenya. Mr. Chairman, my academic journey continued, and in mid-2000s, I was actually among the first Kenyans to venture into the field of conflict resolution, conflict and peace building studies, where I later on acquired a Master of Arts in International Peace, Conflict and Development Studies. This was a new field that time. Not many people knew about it, but I ventured into it out of the personal experiences from where I come from, a county, a region that has been prone to conflicts and violence. So I decided to study so that I get the necessary understanding of conflict analysis and tools that can help in the resolution of those conflicts. And finally, Mr. Chair, in terms of my academic journey, when I worked, I got an opportunity to work with an international organization in the United Nations, UNDP, United Nations Development Program. I felt it was necessary for me to sharpen my skills and to gain the necessary knowledge and tools to improve my project management skills. So that's why I got a partial scholarship from the United Nations to study a Master of Science in Projects Management at the University of Liverpool, again in the UK. So these are some of the tools, these are some of the skills, these are some of the academic qualifications that I'm bringing to the table as we have this dialogue on my suitability as a chairman. And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, maybe later on as we have the conversation, we can relate, we can see the relationship between these qualifications and the work that I'll be undertaking, if successful, at the Commission. Mr. Chairman, in terms of my experience and practical work experience, I must point out to this Commission that even way before I got my degree at the University of Nairobi and got these academic qualifications, I had the rare privilege to work for our electoral management body that time, the predecessor to the current IEBC and IEC. And that is the ECK, Electoral Commission of Kenya. Way back in 1997, before I joined the university, I was recruited as a returning officer to undertake the work of the Commission in voter registration during one of those instances where the Commission undertook mass voter registration. So through that assignment, I gained an understanding on how to register voters, how to prepare the voters register, verification, cleaning it up. So that really exposed me to the work of the Commission in that respect. Later on, Mr. Chair, distinguished panelists, in 1997, during the general election in December, and again in 2002, I served the electoral body as a presiding officer, where I managed the polling station, and I ensured that the voting preparations and the voting, the counting, the tallying, the declaration of results was done in those two respective elections, which were fairly successful, and they ended up with the good outcomes. So, Mr. Chair and distinguished panelists, that is how I got to interact with the work of an electoral management body. And so it is not therefore then a surprise that much later, I sustained the same interest and desire to work with an electoral body such as now IEBC. And I think at some point in 2014, I did apply and I was considered for the position of IEBC CEO. We went through rigorous interviews by IEBC through KPMG and other panels, and I must report that I was among the top 3 candidates. And luckily, of course, or unfortunately, the chance went to someone else who was also a deserving Kenyan. So I got to miss that opportunity, but then I never lost hope, so I kept on, and that journey has brought me to this place at the moment. So, Mr. Chair, in terms of experience, as I was going to go there, I have worked in different institutions, as you may see from my CV. I have worked in law firms. I have worked in Parliament for 2.5 years. I have worked with an independent national commission, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, for 3 years. Then I joined the United Nations, where I actually spent most of my professional career for close to 12 years before I went back home to serve the people of Turkana in Turkana County as their first county attorney. So this, over the last close to 20 years, I have accumulated experience throughout my work in these various institutions, which required different skills, which required different competencies, and of course, through which I acquired a lot of training and capacity building. So, Mr. Chair, I think, I don't know whether I should go into the specifics.
I think that's fair enough. We have noted that most of those things are in your CV, and we appreciate both your academic and career journey and the experience that you cite and that it brings to this panel today. Allow me to ask the Vice Chair to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ethekon, the role of the IEBC is a very intense role when it comes to electoral matters. And even though you have a background in the legal profession, do you have any other multidisciplinary skills that can help you as a chairman of the IEBC to be able to deliver your mandate as the chairperson?
Thank you, Vice Chair, for that question. As I said during my introduction, I actually have invested a lot in acquiring multiple skills. So I'm not just a legal practitioner alone, but I also bring other skills in peace building, conflict management, projects management. So I will demonstrate to you how these skills will be of use to the delivery of the mandate of the IEBC. Madam Chair, Vice Chairperson, as a legal practitioner with 2 master's degrees and wide experience having worked in Parliament, my role was to look at policy and legislative briefs. That was a special assignment under the Parliamentary Strengthening Program by SUNY. And through that, I got to understand how the policy process is done in Kenya. Later on, when I joined the commission, my role was on research, policy, and legislative review and implementation of international human rights treaties. So I know for sure that IEBC is an institution that is anchored in law, that is supposed to ensure compliance with law, that ensures that our elections are managed in a way that is compliant with the principles that are enshrined in the Constitution. There is an elaborate legal framework that governs our electoral processes and, of course, boundary delimitation, right from the electoral planning, execution, up to post-election review and audits. The boundary delimitation, again, will require that understanding of the procedures, the processes, and the legal provisions around that. There are issues of dispute resolution, again, were arising out of the specific mandate of the IEBC. So as a lawyer, I would already be comfortable because I have the knowledge and the tools and to analyze the law, to interpret it, to find it. And more importantly, because my role at the National Commission on Human Rights was actually based on legislative review, I should be able, as the chairman, to lead my commission, commissioners and secretariat and the stakeholders in proposing, in making a case for reviews where, legal reviews where those are necessary. So for me, that skill of legal interpretation, legal writing, legislative drafting will be handy. Then secondly, in terms of my knowledge and skills in projects management, for example, you look at a project, we know, of course, elections. Sometimes elections generally are a process. But we can also look at an election, a specific election, for example, the 2022 elections that is coming in a few years. We can look at it as a project.
You mean 2027?
2027, I mean. The 2022, sorry, Mr. Chair. The 2022 is just past. For example, if we take the election of 2027, already from a project manager's point of view, you can look at that election as a project. And a project has a start date and an end date. And I'm sure that will be reflected in our electoral management election operations plan. So when you look at it, then you have to deliver these elections within the time frame. You have to deliver it within the budget. You have to deliver it within the scope. Then you have to deliver it again, working together with with the project stakeholders. In this case, for the case of elections, you are looking at the various stakeholders we are working with. So as a project management professional, there are specific skills that I'll bring. For example, time management, attention to detail, leading teams with emotional intelligence, making sure that all the teams at the commission, all the stakeholders, their issues or their concerns are taken into account. So there are those specific, including financial management and risk management. So those are some of the special skills that as a project manager I bring on the table. Thirdly, Madam Vice Chair, my knowledge and skills in the professional field of peace building, conflict management, because the Constitution calls upon us to ensure the elections are free from violence, intimidation, harassment. Those skills I have, for example, in the past, then maybe if I explain some of the things that I used to do at UNDP. We supported this country to come up with the conflict early warning and early response system. It is there, it is working, it's called WIANO. Those of you who have interacted with the National Steering Committee on Conflict Prevention and Management. That system worked during the 2010 referendum. It worked during the 2013 elections. And I've not interacted with of late, but I am assured that it's working. And that's a system that, so those are some of the skills that I bring in terms of mediation, negotiation skills, facilitating processes, that ensure the resolution of some of the internal conflicts, but also other conflicts with external actors. So in a nutshell, Madam Chair, without belaboring the point, I am here with all these tools at your disposal, at the disposal of Kenyans, to make sure that we improve our electoral processes in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ethekon. Just as a follow-up, could you give this panel a scenario whereby your leadership skills have been tried and tested in your past career experiences and exposure?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think as we grow professionally and as we work through the various institutions that we've served, there are those moments that call for extraordinary measures. And as leaders, in our own right, in our own standing, we are called upon to respond to those situations. I think for me, I'll give an example, because I've been in this country for quite some time. And for the short period I've lived in this country, I have seen our elections, for example, evolve from the Mlolongo system when I was a young child up to the 1992, 97, up to 2007, and the rest. For me, I'll focus specifically to 2007. I was a young professional, just recruited to join UNDP from the National Commission on Human Rights. And in that role, I was required to set up a unit that will deal with issues of crisis prevention and recovery. So I moved from legal practice now to the field of crisis management and conflict prevention and recovery. But little didn't I know that I think it was almost like a setup, because my seniors in New York and in Geneva, working for the Bureau for Crisis Prevention and Recovery, they came to Kenya. They told me, we need you to hit the ground running. We need you to work around the clock, because we feel and we see, according to our conflict analysis and scenario building, Kenya is going to sort of degenerate into some sort of violent conflicts. But I, of course, as a young professional and passionate Kenyan who believes that Kenya is an island of peace in the sea of turmoil around, I didn't believe them. But fast forward, the election came so fast before I could do anything much, setting up the structures and work, identifying even the national institutions to work with. Then, boom, after elections, we saw what happened, post-election violence, there was crisis. So at that point, I did not have so much experience in that field, because I came from the Human Rights Commission, human rights lawyer, all that. So at that moment of crisis, that is when I stepped up my game as a young leader. I had to lead a team of those professionals who are deployed from across the world to come and support Kenya during that moment of crisis, to undertake mediation, to look at how to respond to some of the conflict hotspots. How do we lower the temperatures? What is it that we need to do to handle some of those hotspots? How do we help the country recover in terms of from that election violence? So I was thrust in the middle of all this, and with very little experience. But I managed, out of creativity, innovativeness, and resilience, to actually lead those teams of some of the most experienced people in resolving global conflicts. And I was there to support them, to guide them, to show them what needs to be done. And I thought that was one of the moments that I stepped up and my leadership was recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Linda, and thank you, Ethacon, for those responses. Very glad that you respond with a smile.
Thank you,
Which is a
Chair.
good thing. Caro Kiome, would you like to ask some questions, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ethacon, welcome again. Let's have a conversation about the right to vote. Article 38 of the Constitution provides the right of every citizen to exercise their free will to suffrage, right, to vote. In order to operationalize that provision of the Constitution, Parliament enacted the Elections Act and the Elections Voter Education Regulations of 2017. To what extent does this law, therefore, support the right of citizens to vote, particularly those citizens that are marginalized, have persons living with disabilities, and those in diaspora?
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Carol, for those questions. I think there are multiple questions there. But if I got you right, I think it's in regard to particularly the voter education.
No, we are speaking generally about the right to vote, for those people who are marginalized, persons living with disabilities, and those in diaspora.
Thank you very much. I think I got you right. I think to respond to that, the rights to political freedom, including the right to vote, the right to contest in an election, to be voted for, I think is very clear, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, as you've rightly pointed so, in Article 38. And these rights, the same Constitution in Article 88 sets up the institutional framework, the policy and institutional framework through which we can now exercise that right. And I must say, from the general principles of elections or electoral processes in Article 81, we are called upon to ensure that the elections are not only free and fair, but also should take into account the fact that not more than 2/3 of those holding elective posts are from positions are from the same gender. Then in the same Article 81, we are also called upon as a commission and as a society to look at the specific needs of the people with disability. Then we have, of course, provisions around our youth, our women, and, of course, the marginalized people. The sort of called minority or marginalized people. We like, even for us from Turkana, we see ourselves as marginalized, and I can actually defend that. So the whole legal framework that supports the realization of the right to vote, the right to participate in the political processes. So we have the Elections Act, which provides the elaborate processes from the pre-election, during the election, and after the election. Then we have the IEBC Act, which sets up the IEBC, which, if I'm lucky, I'll be chairing in the next few months. And that's our main electoral body, which should ensure that the mandate in the Constitution is actually implemented. And that, of course, therefore calls upon institutions like IEBC and others to ensure to make sure the participation of marginalized groups is taken into account in their election planning and regulation. So when you talk about the regulations around voter education, for example, or voter registration, from my experience, and I did mention to the panel that I actually served as a registration officer and then a presiding officer. When you talk about these marginalized groups, you find that sometimes we disenfranchise them in the manner in which we conduct our registration, but also in the manner in which we try to reach them out in terms of voter education. And so for me, you realize in some counties, especially the pastoralist counties in the north, the registered voters are less than what you would essentially expect. The voter turnout during the vote is actually at the lowest. And in some elections, I remember even those ones of 1997 and then 2002, for example, presidential election results were declared even without factoring in those results from some of those regions because the numbers were so dismal and could not affect the overall outcome. So I think as we have conversation around this issue, we need to look at those internal processes, but also external processes, the barriers, and how we can remove those barriers.
So just picking it up from there,
Yeah.
I see you have identified some of the challenges that the marginalized people have. And now, given that you identify as one of those people, among those people who are considered to be marginalized in this country, if you're successful and you become the chairperson of the IBC, what measures then can you put in place through policy that will ensure that these communities, the marginalized communities, are taken care of within the electoral processes, right from the voter registration to voters' education to voting, and their intention at the ballot counting? You say that, I mean, like the IBC declared results without considering their will, so that to ensure that their will does count as much as it does for other Kenyans that are not considered marginalized.
Thank you very much for that follow-up question. I think as chair of the commission, I will have that rare opportunity for the first time in this country to look at these special groups because I identify as one of them and I've seen. So for me, I will lead this commission in transforming the way we do things, in coming up with those strategies, in coming up with those mechanisms and approaches. And remember, as I told the panel before, I am from the Human Rights Commission, and therefore my orientation is in human rights. So I will ensure that a rights-based approach to voter registration, voter education, to the polling is employed. And therefore a rights-based approach will guide us in terms of addressing some of these special needs of these special groups. For example, I will look at how do we enhance the participation of people with disabilities in the electoral processes.
Mr. Ethekon, let's talk first about the marginalized.
The marginalized.
And then we come
All
to the
right, okay,
disabilities
fine.
in that order.
For example, measures, for example, such as how do we reach out to these marginalized groups? There are certain common characteristics. The geographical terrain, the location where these people are. Are they accessible? And if not, can we as a commission then use mechanisms such as mobile voter registration units to reach out to those people in those far-flung and marginalized areas with poor network and communication and transport facilities. Mobile voter registration. There is also the challenge of voter education. How do we reach to these people? Again, we can look at, for example, using local media. Now, luckily, with the advent of devolution, we have counties and many people have invested in vernacular radio stations. Even in Turkana, we have a number of them, Joka FM and all this. So this, as the commission, we work with these vernacular radio stations to reach out to those people who have not gone to school and who can understand the local language, so that then we can disseminate the information and voter education around that. Then during polling, you know, some of the factors that drive the low voter turnout in these areas, you find in some of these areas in northern Kenya, there's a drought, for example, during an election. People would rather concentrate on looking for the basic survival than go and vote, because that's a luxury to them. Areas where there's insecurity. Because of insecurity, people fear to go and vote. And in some cases, I'm told, Chair, with your permission, in some cases we are told, in some regions, during elections is actually, that is the season for cattle rustling. Because, you know why? The security are occupied supporting the election process, providing security around elections. Therefore, once they are reassigned, then you leave a vacuum. And therefore, these cattle rustlers come in. So those are some of the challenges these people. So as a commission chair, I will therefore work around the clock to ensure that we address those security challenges in those areas that suppress their vote. Issues of drought, for example, working with special programs and county governments to ensure that those populations actually can get, you know, some supplies, some food, some relief, emergency relief food, to enable them get something in their tummies so that they can actually be there to exercise their vote and their universal suffrage.
Now let's go to the persons with disabilities. In the same measure, how do we ensure that the persons with disabilities, their needs are taken care of during the electoral processes throughout the entire electoral cycle, and that their will does count again at the ballot?
Thank you. A very specific question to a very specific group. I think, in my view, this is sort of like that group of persons living with disabilities is a group that we tend to keep them silent. You know, they're there, but the attitude of our society is that maybe they don't matter in terms of them, even those people living with disability who want to contest for elections and those ones who want to vote. Because you look, most of the time, even during election campaigns, how many political parties or politicians go out to meet specifically with these groups to listen to them and to beg for their votes. So I think as a commission, we will work to focus on the special needs. But first we have to understand their special needs. For example, there are people who are differently able, there are people who have different types of disabilities. So we need to understand so that we make our responses, our interventions to those specific needs. For example, voting by using Braille. Can we integrate that in technology? So that then we have that as part of the solution. There are those barriers that prevent these people from, for example, even coming out to contest in party primaries and in general elections. For example, the issue of costs. These are groups that might not be endowed with the resources. These are groups that have to deal with cultural prejudices or the barriers. How do we then sensitize the public to be able to give them a chance, just like any other Kenyan, to be able to overcome those barriers, to exercise their right under Article 38.
Thank you. Then let's move to the next category of voters who are youth. We have recently experienced a lot of dissatisfaction and, strong will coming from the young people, the Gen Zs as we call them. So how do we take care of them in the electoral processes to ensure that they participate either through contesting, and if not, when they vote during the polling stations, their needs, the youth?
Thank you very much. Again, my understanding is that from reading the post-election audit report of what transpired in 2022, this category of voters, the youth, were actually a significant number, around 39 point something, close to 40%. So in terms of the real numbers, around 9 million. And this group, of course, you can see their level of participation in an election where the voter turnout was about 64 point something percent. So this group, until of course recently, was again a silent sort of majority until last year when they expressed their views on what they felt. And I think as a commission, as the chair of the commission, given an opportunity, it is something that I will be alive to, and I will seek to engage with the youthful populations of this republic, given that they are now a significant number. And we are looking at, in terms of projections, maybe in the next election, if they are mobilized properly, if they register in large numbers, if they are taken through voter education so that they know even how to vote, this will be a game changer in terms of a population category in our election. So in terms of then, therefore, measures to bring them on board and to cater for them in our electoral processes, I think as a commission, one of the things we'll do, we will revitalize the Youth Engagement Committee. It'll be a specific committee, and I would love to chair such a committee. But so that then we work with their leadership, we work with these groups to identify what are some of these tools that we can use. For example, the use of technology. These are tech-savvy people. These are people who are in spaces such as X, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. So we can work with them and the big technology companies to see how do we reach out to these groups, what language do we use. I'm even suggesting maybe we can use the AI and algorithms to see how do we specifically target them and what kind of messages. So in terms of voter mobilization for them to register, but also to use technology platforms to be able to sensitize them so that by 2027, they are ready to exercise their constitutional rights.
Thank you for that. And moving on to the last category of vote people that I would like us to talk about, this is the diaspora vote. If you recall, the High Court had to, I think 2013, had to make orders that to the IEBC to ensure that the people in the diaspora were granted the chance to exercise their right to vote. Subsequently, there have been progressive realization of that right in regard to the people in diaspora. A few centers in the world have used the embassies to vote. So having been one of those persons from your own experiences who has extensively been living in abroad, what measures then do you foresee, if we become successful, that can be utilized to ensure that the right to vote for people in diaspora is realized and that the IBC can put in place?
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that question. Again, on the right on the rights under Article 38. The diaspora group, these are Kenyans. For one reason or another, they have left the country to look for education, to look for economic empowerment. I think this category is key, particularly given that their contribution even to our economy. Diaspora remittances. So it's a big constituency, even in terms of our taxes. So I think for me, this is a group that I want to take it to account and to focus on. I do understand there have been incremental gains from, I think, about 5 polling stations or countries to now about 12 countries in the last election. And therefore, we are making progress, as you rightly pointed out. The Constitution gives these people the same rights as us, but it says progressive realization. So that, of course, because of the nature and the logistics involved. So as a new commission, duly constituted, in the next few months, we will have a platform, whether it's online or otherwise, to engage with this category, with our Kenyans in diaspora, so that then we can understand what is it that we can do differently to improve their progressive realization of these rights. And of course, we have to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and particularly the Department of Diaspora Affairs, to ensure that how can we structure our registration centers around the embassies and consulates. Maybe even radically we can suggest possibilities of these groups also doing special voting. For example, mail voting or online registration from where they are. So we can look at also the process issues and see what is it that we can change. And that might require also changes in law, so that to accommodate the participation of these groups in the electoral processes. Thank you.
And lastly from me, coming back to the issues of voter suppression, intimidation, and bribery on the voting day, on the polling day, if we may talk about it that way. What are some of those measures that are needed as a way of reform, law reform, policy reform, to ensure that prosecution of those offenses, voter intimidation, bribery, is taken care of?
Thank you. I think we've witnessed, we're not talking hypothetically, but practically we've seen in the previous elections incidences of violence, intimidation, harassment, voter bribery, and we're almost making it sort of look normal, especially voter bribery, for example. And you see, even in some places, you are told, the old ladies, mamas, they'll tell you, my vote is 1,000. So if you don't have 1,000, don't even talk to me. So it happens even in our rural areas. And I think, of course, there are many other factors that drive that. So we as a commission, to ensure the integrity, to ensure the fairness of the electoral processes, so that people exercise their choices on free will, not out of being induced either by money or by some treats or by force through intimidation and threats. So we need to sort out this as a country. And therefore, when you look at the Election Offences Act, we need to look at, are those offenses, are the penalties in the Election Offences Act adequate? For example, I do know voter bribery will attract, for example, a fine of $1 million and maybe imprisonment of, I think, 6 months or 1 year, somewhere there. But anyway, my point is, are those penalties adequate? So we need to look at the Election Offences Act to see whether the penalties match the severity of these offenses that are committed during elections. Number two, in terms of election security, how do we improve our election security around the election period, up to the polling and the declaration of results. So can we then ensure that we structure our security arrangements so that then our security officers are on there to arrest some of these situations, including the incidences of violence. So that then, of course, again, working with the investigative agencies. That's why we bring in the office of the DPP to prosecute, to investigate and prosecute some of these offenses. Of course, I've mentioned working with our police to increase, but also more importantly, that's a bit of the hard approach. If we take the soft approach of being a peace builder, can we then take measures to ensure that we sensitize our populations on the counterproductiveness of violence, intimidation, and bribery, so that then we're able to explain to them, to educate them on the importance of avoiding some of these tactics that actually disenfranchise our populations.
All right. As a follow-up question, I hear you proposing harsher penalties and sentencing, measures. But I'm wondering, there is an existing legal framework today that seeks to deal with these issues. In my view, the problem is not actually maybe the law. The problem could be that that law is not being implemented, is not being enforced, and as you said, we have started taking it normal and casual. The bribery issues, the violence, the harassment, the intimidation of voters that at the end up suppressing voters on the polling day. My concern, and where I would like us to maybe clarify, how do you see IBC come in that area? The law exists. I hear you on your proposals, but in the context of the existing legal framework, what would be the IBC's role to ensure that these offenses are taken care of? I hear the conversation on the DPP, the IG, but does the IBC have any role outside these other agencies, these other government agencies?
Thank you. I think IEBC has a role, because one of the mandates, one of the functions of IEBC that the Constitution has bestowed clearly is monitoring compliance, especially with political parties. Political parties have to comply with certain legal requirements. For example, IEBC can take action, including disqualifying some parties from participating in elections, or some individuals who are culpable for some of these election offenses. But I agree with you. The legal framework is there. The enforcement bit is weak or lacking in some cases, or in most cases. But I think IEBC also, in terms of, for example, we're just talking about prevention of that electoral violence and intimidation. In 2010 and 2013, we had a peaceful referendum in 2010. 2013, we had a peaceful election, generally. We didn't have major incidents. But not because there were no, these things were not there. They were there. But again, as I mentioned to you earlier, the conflict early warning and early response system, which was robust and was able to penetrate across the country, was able to pick up some of these incidences of violence, intimidation, and then action was taken to forestall them. So I think we can work with partners to run that election security arrangement program anchored on a robust conflict early warning and early response system, to be able to capture these incidences. And for me, prevention is better than cure. And it has happened in this country before. And it's something that I'm really willing to share that experience with the Commission and all the stakeholders, how we did it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ethicon. I wish you well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. In the interest of time, allow me to ask Madam Koki to also ask her questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Ethicon, karibu tena, and thank you for a very elaborate response to some of the questions relating to elections, electoral process, and cycle. I would like to just ask two brief questions around the electoral cycle. You have spoken a lot about issues relating to elections operations plans, post-election reviews, legal reforms, and proposed a number of ways to address some of the challenges in elections. I wanted to just, in view of the fact that the IEBC may be reconstituted in a short while, it means that we have very short period of time before the next election. So in the process of electoral cycle, it also means that we will be required, you will be required to lead a process that will address all the electoral cycle activities and the phases that usually take 5 years to be accomplished, and you'll be required to do that in two years and 4 months, to be precise, actually. I want you to tell the panel, if you are given the opportunity to become the chair of the electoral, the IEBC, what would be your priorities? I don't want to ask you about the electoral cycle. Clearly, you understand what it is. But then you also understand the gravity of what needs to be done before the next election. And in fact, this is a special period. We are also required to conduct boundary delimitation, which is also a whole big process. So I just want you to tell the panel and to reassure Kenyans who are watching, when you are given the opportunity to be the chair of the IEBC, how are you going to prioritize and manage these processes that are legally required before the next election? That's part one of the question.
Thank you, Ambassador Koki Moli. I am very happy to see you here. When I used to be in the human rights, our paths used to cross frequently. Allow me then to give my responses to these very vexing questions, because every Kenyan is thinking about the same, that now that it has taken this long to have IEBC in place, the commissioners, and yet we have all these pressing issues that are pending. So allow me then to tell Kenyans, because I'm sure they are watching, many of them, that one of the very, very first tasks that I will undertake as a chair, together with the commissioners and working closely with our secretariat, is to look at, number one, what are these pending issues post-2022 elections that require the attention and decisions of the Commission. Because the Commission takes decisions as a body corporate. So we will look at, for example, matters related to the pending by-elections. I know there are about, I think, 7 of them, or 12. There are issues around, of course, boundary delimitation, for which the constitutional time limits for review lapsed last year around March. And then, of course, there's now where the rubber meets the road, the 2027 elections. How can we then work backwards from the August date to where we begin our work as a commission? And I must tell Kenyans then, therefore, that the reason why this exercise is being undertaken is so that to have the 7 commissioners who will be a board corporate, who are responsible for initiating some of these actions through either gazetting some processes to begin. So as the new chairman, if I'm successful, I will work with my secretariat and and colleagues to look at how do we then sort out the issue of the by-elections. How do we initiate that process? Number two, the issue of boundaries, as you have mentioned. What then needs to be done now that the constitutional time limits has lapsed? So we look at it, I am sure, before the time lapsed, because I know we have a secretariat, and I know these are some of the most professional Kenyans running that secretariat. We will find out as a commission to what extent had they begun the preparatory processes towards the boundary review and delimitations. So we'll look at the work already done, see what needs to be taken forward. But there are also, Ambassador, with your permission, there are also certain hard questions we have to ask ourselves. Now that this boundary delimitation constitutional time limit has ended, what are we supposed to do next? So we will have to seek, for example, dialogue with the judiciary, the Office of the Attorney General, to sort out the legal issues. Then number two, we also have to bring on board stakeholders to have a discussion around the boundary delimitation vis-a-vis the timelines for the general election, which you have rightly mentioned that they are tight. So we have to make a decision as a country whether we can undertake both these exercises at the same time, or we focus as a country to planning and executing the 2022 elections. And this is an open discussion. We don't have the answers as a commission, but what I assure Kenyans is that we will call that dialogue so that we can address this very, very critical issue. Number three, in terms of the IEBC itself, I am aware that their strategic plan, which is the document that guides the Commission in terms of execution of its mandate, may have expired, and therefore there are preparatory processes towards coming up with a new strategic plan. So priority as chair would be for us to finalize that strategic plan, because strategic plan is a document that will guide us in terms of delivery of not only the general election, but also other critical processes, including the boundary delimitation. So our focus will be to look at that strategic plan, to approve it, and then from the strategic plan, we can now derive the electoral operations plan, and of course many other plans, including the security. We sort out the funding issues. So for us, once we have these strategic policy guiding documents, and we are very comfortable as commissioners, remember we'll also be new, maybe most of us, if we are successful, we will have to very quickly internalize this and then roll out. And where certain decisions will require me as a chairman to gazette so that we initiate them, I will do so as soon as practicable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the answers that you have provided, and just hope that as you pray and hope that the Secretariat has done a lot more preparations for the administrative work, and we expect that they have done that in terms of preparing for the election, so that you or anyone else who gets this opportunity is able to plug in the processes and just ensure that the processes that require gazettement or require the commission are taken care of. Just lastly, I know the boundary delimitation will consequently resort to fresh registration of voters, and of course there are younger voters who have since become of age that will be registering, and that requires another big job of cleaning the voters register, updating it and making it current. And all this work requires something you have mentioned called budget and funding. How are you going to address that issue we have read that the Secretariat had proposed or asked for some money. And I just want us to discuss briefly on the issue of budgeting and the issue of your 6 colleagues, because being a member of the IEBC does not necessarily require you to have specific skills and competencies that you may require. So it may require some induction or some training. How are you going to deal with this to bring together this team and to get the necessary funding and budget to carry out the work?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think the issue of funding of IEBC and the elections and other processes, including delimitation, if we go there, will require us to engage with the Parliament, because that's the one that holds the purse strings. We will need to also engage with the Treasury to see how we can unlock some of these things. You know, our elections, of course, my understanding is sometimes you read in the media and elsewhere, is one of those expensive elections. And I know, of course, there are those cost drivers. So as a commission, we are aware that, of course, because we live in this country, we are aware of the limitations of the resources because of the hard economic times, not only in Kenya, but globally. So we will look at what we can get from the exchequer. But first and foremost, we will have, as new commissioners, we have to sit with our secretariats to understand the costing element, the cost aspects of our work. So that then, even as we seek funding, whether it's 60 billion, as I've read it in the media, or 100 billion, we know exactly what we are talking about. And as a project manager, one of the things that experiences and skills that I've built over time is that element of costing the various tasks and units. So you attach certain units cost to some things. So we will have to interrogate that budget or come up with a new budget proposal so that then we engage the key stakeholders in that respect. But allow me also to mention some years back when I was at UNDP, we used to support the IEBC in terms of funding certain processes. And I think I did also Kenyans to be comfortable. UN is an intergovernmental body, so it's not some NGO there trying to influence things in this country. This is an intergovernmental body that has the credibility and the capacity to support. But we as a commission will also look around and say, hey, who else can help us where there are certain funding gaps so that they can plug in. But we need to be very clear on what is it that we are costing, how much, and where are we getting these resources from, so that even when we are talking about the looking around for our partners, we are able to tell them this is where the deficit is and this is where we need their support. So I think that issue. And then, of course, internally, the issue of commissioners and induction. I think that's one of the first assignments we will have to undertake so that everybody is comfortable. When we are talking about budgeting or electoral processes and partnerships, then everybody's on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ethekon, and thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. This time I'd like to ask FCP Etanui to ask some questions.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Karibu Bwana Ethekon. A question related to what Ambassador has asked you about the funding. Now I want to look at the accountability part of it. If you look at the Auditor General reports, IEBC accounts have always been qualified. I don't know whether they have gotten any unqualified report. Reason being that there are issues touching on procurement matters, how they have accounted for the funds allocated. So as you rightly put it, you'll look for funding from Treasury, you'll get UNDP and other donors to support. But the major issue that has been there at IEBC is accountability of the funds. And you will note the Public Accounts Committee reports. If you're to look at them, there are many key audit matters that have been raised. So as the chair, yes, we do know you are not the accounting officer, but you are the head of that institution. You are the head of the electoral management body. And yes, there is an accounting officer, but you are responsible for the commission as a chair. So what mechanism will you put in place, or what strategies will you put in place to ensure that there is accountability in the resources that have been allocated?
Thank you, CPA Tanui. And CPA Tanui, for your information, I attempted to follow your footsteps by studying CPA some years back after high school, but I managed only to reach CPA 2, thereabouts. Then I dropped it.
Yeah, so you can still continue.
Thank you. I think with this enormous task ahead, I may postpone it to a later date. But thank you very much, CPA Tanui. I think the question of accountability, because we have scarce resources in this country, and those institutions entrusted with these resources must understand that even to be an accounting officer of IEBC or the chair, these are positions that you hold in trust for the benefit of the people of Kenya. And one of those duties and obligations imposed upon us by law is to ensure that we account for and we are transparent in a manner in which we expend public resources. So as a chair, as a new chair, I will actually begin by taking a sample of some of these reports, the previous reports, to be able to understand where is the problem. Because the auditors' reports, they have done their assignment thoroughly, and they have pointed out where there are these loopholes. So as a commission, to be able to seal some of these loopholes, we have to understand where the problems comes from, whether it's in procurement, whether it's in disbursements. So we will interrogate these reports, see the clear recommendations of the Auditor General, but also the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee, so that then we have to set up an implementation framework and timelines on how we are going to address those. It could be that maybe the money has not been lost or eaten. It could be that there are certain weaknesses in terms of the internal processes, and therefore we need to strengthen our financial management and risk management processes and procedures and policies. Number two, I do know in any corporate institution, there is always an internal audit and risk management kind of arrangement or committee that is normally headed by a professional outside there, probably a member of the iceberg. And therefore, I believe the Commission has such a committee, audit and risk. We will look at the role of that committee in terms of helping us to manage some of these financial and fiduciary risks and risks associated with procurement issues. So that then we can seal the loopholes and hopefully move towards getting that unqualified report which we saw, which everybody desires in any corporate institution such as IEBC. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also acknowledge the many qualifications that you have, even the CPA too. So congrats on that. Now, my second question, Isaac Hassan, the former chair IEBC, actually in his book, he talks of to be a chair of the Electoral Commission. He calls them 3 Gs. And one of the 2 Gs that I remember is that you need to have grandchildren, you need to be playing golf. And I was looking at your age, and I was wondering whether you meet any of those criteria. So what do you tell people who are saying you could be young enough to be the chair of IEBC?
Thank you, CPA Tandui. Maybe looks are deceiving. I don't know. But at the age of 48, going to 49, I think this is the prime. This is the best age any professional can wish for, to be in positions of higher calling and higher responsibility. So to me, I feel I have the energy, I have the aptitude, the intellectual alertness, I have the necessary tools in terms of education and experience. And looking even forward, I believe if I do a splendid job in this running this commission for the next 6 years, it's basically I'll have something to tell my grandchildren because I'll still be alive to tell them the stories and the younger generations of this country. So for me, this is the right age. Thank you.
Lastly, given the nature of our politics, and you rightly said looks may be deceiving, and I've actually listened to you, I think, for the last 1 hour. And I'm figuring out what transpired at KICC in 2007. You remember when the chair of IEBC there, Kivuitu, was at KICC. And just the other day at Bomas of Kenya. And looking at Ethicon today, you know, the presentation that you've had, you're mean, you know, you're humble. And those demonstrations that happen after the elections, people are walking to your office at IEBC and they say they want to see the chair. Or you're preparing for 2027 elections. And you have a stakeholder meeting, we are convening in a room like this, and there are players, active players in the elections, and they are demanding. Do you have that stamina to address those presidential candidates that have walked into IEBC headquarters, that are confronting you and demanding that you do certain things in a particular way? What can you say of that?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I think it is very serious what in the last, in some of these elections, like the ones you have cited, that those incidents happened in the Republic of Kenya. It is very sad, it's very unfortunate. As proud Kenyans who take this country as our proud home, because we don't have any other country, for us to degenerate to a level where we reach to those I don't know even how to describe those incidences, but as a country, in as much as I, as an individual chair in that hotspot, will have to think on my feet and how to handle the situation. But I would like also to call upon the entire country, the people of this republic, right from this panel, to think, why do we and how did we get to that level? What are these underlying issues as a society that we must look at for us not to be? For most people, you know, CPA Tanui and the distinguished panel, with your permission, Chair, even applying for this job is pressure itself. I will speak from my heart. There are those who say, congratulations, go for it. You have what it takes. Then there are those who are saying, no. You're going there, you're going to die, they're going to beat you, they're going to do this, all this negativity. And the sum total of it, when I soul search myself, I say, but even if I don't go there, who will do it? Some Kenyan must do this job. Unless we are talking about outsourcing it to some somebody in India, somebody in Latin America, or wherever. But if the Constitution says a Kenyan citizen, because that's what's in the law, must do this job, then somebody has to do it. And that's why I'm here precisely, well aware of those pressures. But for me, as an individual, I know I have the stamina, the strength, the mental capacity to withstand those fracas. But as a commission, we'll put in place measures to try, learning from experience, to avoid those measures. Both, of course, security, immediate, but more importantly for me, I will open up this conversation to stakeholders, to the people of Kenya. Why do we have to go to get to that level of violence in front of cameras, in front of the whole world? That a process that we have taken time and invested a lot of money in, we've cast our vote, we've counted at the polling station. And now we, at that point, when we now want to declare the final results, then we lapse into that kind of anarchy. So for me, as a chair, and as a new commission, we will begin to work with the electoral stakeholders. There are, of course, the political elites. That's where the problem is. We have to talk to this group and say, you can compete, you can win, but you can also prepare not to win. Because ultimately, it's the will of Kenyans that shall prevail. It is that vote at that polling station that determines your fate. So therefore, we have a conversation on how is it that we can manage situations where I am not the winner. And I would like to inform this distinguished panel of an experience that we had in 2013, where we had the two sides and many other candidates, and we were aware of such kind of things. And that's why it never happened 2013. The reason why it never happened is we working outside there, and I think it was that time the Isaka-san was chair. We supported what you call mediation processes by some of our elders in this country. Elders, both men and women, of a certain stature in the private sector, in the public service. We brought them together to be our interlocutors, to be the bridge between IEBC and the presidential candidates. And we got some of the close relatives of some of these presidential candidates to speak to them, some of their business partners, to whisper, to say, hey, if in the event that your votes don't reach that threshold, remember, you still have business in this country. You still have your daughter in this country, your grandchildren in this country. You have a country to protect. And therefore, whatever happens, let us take the legal route, which is go file a petition, ventilate the issue at the Supreme Court, whatever the outcome, let the country move on. We did it. And I remember, if you recall, those of us who were there at that time, remember peace charters. We had these candidates, all of them, commit to sign a peace charter. And we publicized it up to the determination by the Supreme Court, where we reminded them, and we reminded Kenyans that so and so, they have committed. They are not going to incite violence, they are not going to do this, but they have accepted they will follow the due process of the law. So that kind of arrangement, those kind of ideas, working with stakeholders, can help us to forestall the unfortunate situations and scenarios we witness in KICC and in Bomas.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks. If I was in a privileged place like yourself, I'll have told Tanwi that I grew up in Turkana, so I can manage hard times and situations.
Thank you, Chair, for that.
Okay, let's have our friend Misati.
Thanks so much, Thekon. You have actually explained yourself. I was just doing a follow-up on when Ambassador Koki asked you about the priorities. Maybe you forgot about the issue of voter registration, I want to follow that with my question, where I'm looking at the IEBC commissioners and the secretariat. In the Krieger report, there were some recommendations which were done to on how IEBC commissioners and the secretariat should operate. May you set right to this panel some of the recommendations that you know of, the information you have, because given that you are going to be the chair of IEBC, given an opportunity, you should be able to be fast about those recommendations of the Krieger report.
Thank you, Mr. Mohati.
Misati.
Mr. Musati.
Musati.
Thank you. I'm just sorry about that. Yeah. The Kriegler report arose as a result of the events of 2007, 2008, in which we experienced that post-election violence. And then, of course, there was that process of internal review of our electoral management bodies. And I think some of the recommendations touched on the roles, the functions of the secretariats vis-a-vis the commissioners. And therefore, there was a recommendation to clearly delineate these roles so that to avoid situations where there are conflicts between the secretariat and the commissioners that can sometimes undermine the credibility of the institution, but also the credibility of the electoral processes. So that's one of the key recommendations that I can recall.
Thanks so much. Now, I want to make a follow-up question on the same. Kenyans are watching, and Kenyans are wondering why, for instance, the roles of the IEBC commissioners, when they are not there, the gazettement, the issue of gazettement, so that voter registration can go on. What is your take? Because it's actually the secretariat which should be able to do that. Because why? Is it a problem in the regulations or in the law? Because the law says voter registration should be a continuous process. So Kenyans are wondering, why should IEBC staff all over the country be earning even salaries in the first place? What do you think you'll be able to do as a chairman to ensure that this process of voter registration is continuous? Because like now, if the commissioners are not there, they're not doing anything much, why should they not be doing voter registration in the first place?
Thank you, Mr. Mohati. I think this issue has also been disturbing my mind whenever I try to interrogate our electoral processes and wonder why do we have to wait until sometimes towards elections, then we start running like headless chickens, trying to do mass voter registration. And yet, the commission over time has put in place actually on a normal, regular basis to register voters and to clear. So for me, I think my understanding at the moment is that the law, as it is, arising from the constitutional provision that makes IEBC a corporate entity, that corporate entity now makes it, in terms of decision making, it is the commission constituted as a board that makes some of those. Most decisions originate by way of gazette. Presidential election or vacancy has been declared, the chairman will gazette. Voter registration, chairman will gazette. Voter education. So for me, we need to look at the law as it is and to ask ourselves, does it serve public interest this way, or public interest will better be served if we decentralize some of these things so that then all that is needed is some kind of delegation of responsibility to the Secretariat to run with it. So for me, it's also a vexing question to me. But as a new chair with my commissioners, we will look at this and then make proposals working with political parties and other stakeholders to see whether this is a case for law reform. For me, I think that's how I would look at it.
Thanks so much. It will be an issue, I wanted to remind you, it will be an issue of looking at the regulations, because the Constitution is very clear that further registration should be a continuous process. So it's a matter of looking at the regulations. The other last question from me, or rather reminder to you, is that among the recommendations of the critical report was the formation of the tripartite dialogue platform between the Election Management Board, the IEBC, the Registrar of Political Parties, and the political parties, the PPLC that exists, Section 38. I wanted to remind you that it's, if you have any details about Section 38 of the Political Parties Act, that was actually a recommendation of the critical report. So the only question I wanted to ask you, just to finish, is whether you are aware why that recommendation came. Do you have, if your history serves well, particularly the one of the dialogue?
Yes. I think this recommendation, I think, arose because of the election is not, it's a process, and it has many sub-processes, then it has many actors. So when you look at IEBC, it's the constitutionally mandated body to deal with electoral matters. But political parties, these are our clients, these are our key partners. These are the people we are there for, to facilitate them to participate in the political processes. So when you have the three institutions, the one that regulates political parties, their formation, internal democracy, dispute resolution, and then you have IEBC that deals with the managing the processes involved. So that dialogue is critical in addressing some of the issues along the process, taking into account some of the opportunities that dialogue brings, some of the opportunities for addressing challenges pre-election, for example, including challenges around nomination of party candidates, compliance with the party lists, and all this. So there are a number of issues that this structured dialogue, this structured platform can actually address in the electoral cycle. So I think it's a very important recommendation. And again, you've seen, it's just not only this. Over the years, many other informal platforms have also come up to foster dialogue. For example, our dialogue with other stakeholders, including, for example, the Interreligious Council, including civil society and what have you. So creating these safe spaces where people can ventilate issues and resolve will actually forestall a lot of things, including litigation, which is normally expensive. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I wish you well, but I just wanted to remind you that when the Clear Commission, they were getting public information, they were told that the suspicion between the political parties and the election management body was so much during that post-election violence. The parties complained they were not getting information. So that is the reason why that dialogue, because for us to have a free and fair process, the stakeholders, the key players, the political parties have to be brought to the table to avoid that suspicion. Thanks so much, and I wish you well.
Totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James Misati. And I would like to ask Ms. Fatuma Saman to also ask some questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate you and thank you Mr. Ethekon, for being an inspiration to the children of the North.
Thank you, thank you, madam.
Doing 4 degrees and 2 diplomas in carefully selected areas is not a mean feat. So thank you from a mother. That's outside the interview. I've listened to you express clearly the IEBC mandate, the role, the understanding of how the governance structures and how they work. So for elections to be considered fair, the IEBC is expected to manage the electoral process not only by ensuring neutrality among the candidates, but fairness to the voters to the extent that the voters get equitable access to voting and the vote is protected and has a meaningful result till the end. The vote is protected and is meaningfully, it has a meaningful impact till the end. Because if you look at carefully our history, voter apathy and disillusionment comes from the lack of that. So if you are lucky to become the chair of the IEBC, how would you ensure that the voter gets that equal opportunity and the votes are protected till the end and they have a meaningful impact? What are the initiatives that you will champion as the chair of the IEBC?
Thank you, madam. I think there are a number of issues that arise there. Number one is the issue of IEBC taking its mandate seriously, because IEBC is mandated to ensure that not only is the election fair, free, credible, transparent, verifiable, and more importantly, peaceful. IEBC is required to run the election in such a way that it must be seen to be what the Constitution has said. So all those elements must be there. And therefore, as we plan our electoral cycle, as we put in place our electoral operation plan, we have to put it in a way that it speaks to these issues. Number one, on the issue of the fairness, the participation of voters, we will put in place a system that will ensure that all the eligible voters are registered and are prepared to exercise their constitutional rights to vote. That therefore includes us reaching out to those marginalized areas, as we've had that conversation already, through those strategies. It involves us looking at those special groups, which we've had that conversation already on those strategies, and those will be in that operational plan. But more importantly, once we've registered everybody, we have to ensure the issues around the voter register, that we clean it up, that it's properly audited to ensure that only those eligible voters are actually allowed to exercise their voting and constitutional rights. Then number two, in terms of that part, the middle part, the polling, we have to ensure that we put in place measures that will forestall. For example, when you're talking about the neutrality and fairness, issues of, for example, those bribery and due influence, intimidation, come into mind. Because you cannot have a free, fair, neutral election when the voters are actually constantly being bombarded with either bribes, intimidation, harassment, and also these sorts of threats to a free and fair and neutral election. So we will put measures in place, working again with actors, political parties, to ensure that we manage these incidences that will put undue pressure to the voters, so that they're able to express their free will, exercise their universal suffrage rights, based on the equality of their vote and the quality of their vote. Because a vote that you cast in your free will is a quality vote. Then there are issues of access during the polling. As an ex-presiding officer, there are certain barriers that can affect citizens' access, and especially those with special needs, to the polling station and to the polling booth, and to be able to cast their vote as of their free. That's why, for example, we have measures such as mechanisms to assist some of the voters who cannot be able to write, to read and write. Those measures are there just to ensure that they are assisted to exercise their constitutional right. So that in that way we ensure that fairness and equity. Then, of course, during the voting, the security around the polling station should be such that it gives people the confidence to come and cast their vote. That's where now we look at, of course, issues. For example, we have some special categories. We've not even spoken about them. For example, women. In elections, you find that this group can be intimidated, and because it's a rough game, we've made it rough, which it shouldn't. It should be peaceful and smooth. So you find that sometimes we scare some of these constituencies because then, coming there to haggle, to fight, to kill, and all that. So I know, of course, currently the commissioners, the number of voters accessing the particular polling station has been capped at 700, I think, to facilitate that that opportunity to cast their vote quickly. But we will look at those special issues around the security of, for example, women, mothers with their children, pregnant women, and other, of course, special groups, including people with disabilities. And then, of course, the integrity of the process itself, just to make sure the Kenyans have confidence that if I cast my vote, it is my vote, it is my choice, and it's going to be counted. It is going to be tabulated, and it's going to be announced or declared. So again, we will make sure that the Commission and our staff conducting these exercises do the right thing. And of course, as a Commission Chairman, I will ensure that our staff, those who are managing elections and managing other processes, are people of integrity. People who can protect the Commission and the integrity and credibility of their processes. So from that, the voter registration, the voting, the counting, and of course the transmission of results, we will ensure that the process is seamless, it is free, it is fair, it is credible, it is transparent, and we should be held accountable for it in the end. And if there are any failures or mistakes, once we do the audit, then we should be able to use those recommendations to make an improvement for the next one. So I would summarize that in that respect. Thank you.
As a follow-up question, what would be the role of voter education in all this, bearing in mind that there are stakeholders whose rights have been curtailed using negotiated democracy, which actually undermines democracy. So if you are to tweak the curriculum, or rather to improve and create, take care of these interests in terms of stakeholder engagements, what are your thoughts around this?
Thank you, Madam. I know negotiated democracy, I think sometimes it happens in where we come from, in the northern parts of the country, where elders sit and the stakeholders sit and agree. Maybe some candidate shelves their ambition in favor of another one and things like that. And maybe in the process, the people of that region miss out on maybe a candidate who could have served their needs better had they been given the freedom and the choice to support that candidate. So for me, I think, I don't know whether our law allows for negotiated democracy. I don't think it allows for negotiated democracy at that level. But what I do know is that in terms of accommodating special interests, then we have factored in that proportional representation into our laws, into our Constitution, Article 90, and therefore then allows political parties, as they fight for this thing, as they haggle, but they are reminded, yes, there are certain categories of people, for example, the women, that you need to include in your party lists, persons living with disability, the youth, the marginalized groups, because understanding the power play, because politics and elections is about power play. So when you identify this group, this category, and knowing that they may not have so much clout, so much power, then that's how proportional representation has been factored in. So to be able to build the capacities of these people. But when we sit back in Turkana or Elwak and agree on who will be our women rep or who will be our governor, then I don't think that is within the Constitution and the law. Because the law is about universal suffrage, the recognition that each vote matters and that people should cast their votes on the basis of their free will. Thank you.
Thank you. Universal suffrage and the emphasis on the universal suffrage and the emphasis on the rights to vote independently.
Thank you very much. And now we'll ask Nicodemus Bore to also ask you some questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman. You have generally described yourself as a human rights lawyer, though you did something on oil and gas. I don't know, you had the intentions of becoming a baron, oil baron. And from your CV, you have also noted that you have worked very closely with the women of the world and developed very gender-sensitive policies. Coming back home, we note that there has been this very elusive two-thirds gender rule principle. And now, given a chance to become the chair of IEBC, what strategies or recommendations would you propose to help us achieve this principle?
Thank you, Mr. Bore. I think the question of gender is very important, and I think our Constitution speaks to that question. And I think I just finished by trying to discuss that issue of proportional representation. So in terms of gender, this has been a national debate. And when I look at the books, when I look at the reports and the discourse generally out here, and looking at what the Commission did in the last election, the Commission, working with political parties, tried to enforce the compliance, tried to ensure the compliance with the party list requirements in the political, in the law, for purposes of actually bridging the gender gap. But of course there were some challenges which I will explain. But generally speaking, when you look at our county assemblies, the elections under Article 177 and the requirements of the law, the party list under Article 90, where now these political parties have to share certain positions so that then they can meet the agenda to that requirement. The report, if you read the post-election evaluation report, it shows that actually the county assemblies have met the 2/3 gender role. And you can begin to see the process by which some of the safeguards in the law, where now the computation of how do you allocate those seats. And despite the fact that there are still about 4, according to the Elections Act, but the County Government Act talks about 6. That's the youth, people with disability, and the marginalized groups. But the gender top-up, taken in totality, then the county assemblies have made it. Where the culprits are and where the problem is the National Assembly. The Senate, I think, has a gap of about 2 to meet it, just to slightly to stagger to it. But the problem, what I read in the report, is that the enormous gap exists in our county, in our National Assembly. So then, what is it that we require to do? Some of the measures we can put in place to bridge this gender gap. I know it's still an ongoing, it's open, but some of the thoughts that I have based on what the law says at the moment, until we go maybe for a major, maybe constitutional reform process or legislative serious reforms. At the moment, how about we look at, because then you have in assembly, you have 290 elected. Then you have I think 12. And therefore to play around, so that's the 12 is the gender top-up. And I think it's fixed at that at that level. So then you cannot even, twist the political parties through the political party list to top up, because they have been foreclosed. Again, the same with the Senate. So we have to find a way where then maybe we can open up that, so that then in law we can have more latitude within the political party arrangements, within their internal democratic processes, for them now to mobilize these constituents, either through proportional representation, but also through supporting them, the women, to actually contest the the elected seats. So in terms of that proportional representation, the hands of even the assembly are tied by the law. So we need maybe some changes in the law to allow that flexibility like the county assemblies have done. But for me, I think the whole aspect of proportional representation was a bridge gap. It was not meant to really last forever. It was meant for us to uplift these marginalized people, the ethnic minorities, the women, the youth, the people with disability. But in a country that is progressive, that our democracy is keeping on, it's improving. Why don't we dream of a day where Kenyans can wake up and look at Carol and Professor and give them an equal chance through electing them by the ballot? So I think we need to put measures as a country to support our women, our marginalized people, to begin to participate, to begin to enjoy the Article 38 rights. So we need to to look at those barriers. For example, in most elections, maybe women shy away because of the level of violence and intimidation, the amount of money you need for you to contest an elected seat. So we need to address issues of election financing. How does it impact these marginalized groups or special groups? We need to look at security. We need to look at the attitudes of our parties within their party structures and arrangements. What is it that they are doing to encourage more women to contest, actually, to run even against men? So that then Kenyans can be given that opportunity to choose from a variety of candidates, not this man-dominant kind of electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I now want to ask Professor Adam Solo also to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Edun Ethicon. You know, you are one of the people whom you look at the CV and you're trying to make the connection. But listening to you, the connection comes out. And therefore, that makes me change
Thank you.
the question that I wanted to ask. Because the Vice Chair and other members have brought out that connection.
Thank you, sir.
I want to go the Tanui route, FCPA Tanui, to give you the practical aspects of our election and therefore ask you to tell Kenyans why at 48 you are that man that they have been looking for. FCPA Tanui gave you the example of Samuel Kivitu the late. He was quoted as the results were coming in, saying, I can't reach my returning officers. I hope they are not cooking results out there. Then on the day that he was announcing the results at KICC that you have referred to, he was alone with only one media station, the state media station, with GSU around him. And the swearing in took place at dusk. No normal fanfare, no presidents invited, no ambassadors invited. We had to change the law so that now there's a very clear legal process of swearing in the president. In Bomas that you have talked about, a near similar scenario took place. The Supreme Court, even as it threw away the petition, said that the chairman had created an illegal office. The chairman had assigned fellow commissioners what you would call hospitality duties. And in the illegal office, the secretariat was carrying out duties that normally the commissioners are supposed to oversight. You gave us the example of how you and other men and women of wisdom of this country saved the country in 2013 through backroom channels. In other words, the pressure cooker, you released it to release the gas to the Supreme Court that was created by the 2010 Constitution because of the 2007. What I'm asking this gentleman from a marginalized community who, as Fatuma says, has gone against the odds. If you are made chairman, what would you do so that we don't make the Supreme Court the releaser of the pressure, and instead IEBC, led by Edun Ethicon, is the one that resolves and brings confidence to Kenya that finally we have a referee that leads an election that is fair, that is transparent, that both winner and loser and Kenyans and observers can say, this was the result.
Thank you, Professor Adam Solo. It's a pleasure to see you here. The last time I met with you was when we were presenting our views from Turkana on the BBI process. This question is almost emotional, coming from deep from your heart. And as I said, we shouldn't have to witness those kind of scenarios. So as I said earlier, we need to look at as a country and as a people, where did the rain start beating us? Could it be the issues of trust in our electoral management processes? Could it be issues of pertaining to those people who from time to time are given those responsibilities to manage our electoral processes? Could it be an issue of processes? So I think, as you've rightly pointed out, from the Kivuitu debacle to Bomas, in between, there have been certain constitutional changes, some legislative changes that have tried to move us from that situation where Chairman Kivuitu declared openly that he doesn't know where his returning officers are. And in the recent elections, as recent as 2013, 2017, and to date, we've witnessed a situation where the returns from the polling stations and the constituency tallying centers actually reach the final tallying center. So there have been certain improvements. For example, because I know most of the time voting might not be the real problem, but where the elephant in the room is in the manner in which we handle our results, the manner in which we tally, tabulate, count, tabulate, tally, and then transmit. So we've seen certain improvements through the use of technology, the RTS, the ERTS, the Electronic Result Transmission System, as we witnessed last time. We've seen improvement in openness, transparency, in the manner in which the results are handled both at the polling station but also at the other levels. So for me, the way I look at it as Kenyans, I think there's a big gap, deficit in terms of us as Kenyans trusting our institutions to deliver free, fair, transparent, verifiable elections. So that lack of confidence is in our institutions and our processes is what we need to address. And if you look at, Prof, even the cost of our elections alone, it's one of the most expensive. And for me, the way I look, from where I sit, I see that lack of trust is what is costing us, even in accounting terms, in financial terms. Because then we tend therefore now to sometimes even over-prescribe, over-legislate, over-regulate. For example, technology, we know we have to procure, then we have to do audit, we have to get an independent firm to audit it, all the way up to after elections. So for me, I would pray for the day when we as Kenyans can trust and say, Mr. Rastas doing Ethicon has really nothing to gain by bungling elections, by undermining the will of the people of Kenya. What do I stand to gain? So I would want a situation where this new commission, We sit down. Number one priority, how do we restore trust? How do we bridge that gap? We look at those processes. We look at the people, even internally, our staff. Are they neutral? Are they impartial? Are they professional? We as commissioners, we come individually. I'm here today, I'm speaking for myself, but there'll be others, they speak for themselves. You will pick 6, maybe perhaps to join me, luckily. But we bring different personalities, different orientations, different persuasions. So we need to reconcile all that and look at the law and say, look, the Constitution, Article 73, tells us the position you occupy as a commissioner, as chair, and as secretariat is a commission of trust by the people of Kenya. And therefore, you should do it, carry out your duties and functions as commissioners in a manner that must comply with the objectives and the purpose of the Constitution. And it gives us all that directions. Number 2, we must behave and carry out our duties in a manner that respects the people of this country. Because when you look at what happened in Bomas, it doesn't show any respect to the people of Kenya who have given us this trust and responsibility. So for me, I will work hard to ensure that collegially and together as a team, we interpret the law and we stick to the law. And if it's, for example, that issue that's normally contentious, the result transmission and the declaration of the final results. In the case of what you've mentioned, as commissioners, we are supposed to work as a team. We have to have structured kind of engagement. Our decision making must be such that we make decisions based on the law. And where we have disagreements, we should be able actually to record, to air those disagreements, say, I disagree with this, but it has to be recorded. For example, in the case of that presidential results, the law and in the rulings of the Supreme Court, the results at the polling stations are final. The results recorded in Form 34A. So the role of the chair is to return and declare as they are. No alteration, no anything. But then our role as a commission, collectively, the 7 of us, should be to verify and to ensure that they correct what is in the portal, what is what we have been, the returns that have come from the polling stations out of the, I think, 46,229 polling stations, that these forms actually are authentic, the security features, the recording of all these things, so that then we do it as a collegiate, as a collective. And where any member of my team disagrees, we should be able to record it in our minutes and in our reports, so that I made a decision. For example, if as a chairman I disagree with certain things, I can be able to say this number of forms, I don't think they are authentic. And then it has to be recorded. So that then we don't witness a situation where I take off and or I leave somebody else to do this. Yet we were recruited together and we were banded together to undertake a national duty, which is very sensitive. So, I mean, I would not, So for me, it's about that internal dialogue. It's about structuring our decision making. And it's about, of course, assigning ourselves duties. And the case of Secretariat, for example, you've mentioned, I've worked with the commission before, the National Commission on Human Rights with Maina Kay as chairman. And in that commission, we never witnessed any fighting between us and our commissioners or, such things. So based on those lessons, I should be able to have the Secretariat do the jobs that they are mandated to do. And we as a commissioners, we take responsibility for what the law mandates us to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy at the way you have maintained your calm. There's something I was testing. My second one, again, let me give you a practical example. in Kenya and many African countries, incumbents never lose elections. You've already had the country, and we have to address these things because we need to always save our country. We've already had of one-term president. What has been the response from his side? We are the county that knows how to produce presidents for 24 years. So you can already see where the country is getting to politically. My question to you is that effective leadership at IEBC is not merely about technical competence. Effective leadership at IEBC needs selfless service based solely on public interest. The question, triple E, because you are Erastus Edecon. In your previous positions in your professional life, is there an instance that you are faced with a situation in which you had to choose between a decision that it's either based on popularity, that is hard to make due to undue pressure, or that you had, despite all the circumstances surrounding you, stand by the Constitution and the law? If it exists, which one was it? And which approach did you use to arrive at the outcome?
Thank you, Professor, for that question. I think throughout my professional career, I have tried as much as possible to, I would rather frame it this way. I've been largely lucky not to have been put in those uncomfortable situations where you choose between breaking the law or upholding your own selfish personal interest. Because I worked with the Commission, again, the standards there, the ethical integrity standards were very, very high. United Nations is a highly regulated entity where you are required to declare any other personal interests, and the systems and structures are systems of accountability and decision making. But when I ventured to back home to give back to my people in Turkana, when I saw an opportunity, but also the challenges they were going through in terms of grappling with legal issues, I went to serve as the first county attorney for Turkana, and I supported them to set up the office of the county attorney, where I served for 6 years. It is in that environment of public service that sometimes you are faced with some of these uncomfortable situations and scenarios where you have to choose either fidelity to the law, or you bend the law, or you break the law for the benefit of certain things. And I must tell you, throughout my 6 years, without getting into specifics, there are some incidences where a procurement takes place, and then when it comes to my attention for the legal opinion or legal advice, and then you get this pressure coming from some of those officials saying, we want this to go this way, we want this to go that way. For me, as the county attorney that time, and even now in future when I assume a public office, I have always maintained that fidelity to the law. There are those instances where I have had to say as it is. And the way I managed to circumvent that, or to beat that kind of group, was to do my advisory in writing and to say, this is against the law, take it or leave it. And in that case, then people started getting used to it. So that therefore then by the time they come, they bring an issue to my attention, they know I will stick with the law. But then the downside of it, sometimes some of these guys go underground, so they do their own things there, and they don't bring to your attention. So that by the time the CPA Tanuis group comes, the auditor, they check their books. That's when some things come out of the closet. Then you realize, but what happened? This should have been brought to my attention. And this situation could not have arisen had you brought it to my attention and followed my legal advice. So for me, the respect for the rule of law, the respect for the Constitution, the processes, the Public Finance Management Act, the procurement law, the public officer ethics, those are not things you can compromise with. So when it comes to that, it actually helps you. It's not even a dilemma, Professor. Because when the law is very clear, what dilemma do you have? You just follow the law and you'll be on the right side. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you have some two short questions, kindly?
Yes, Bwana Ethekon, you were quite elaborate when my colleague Caroline Kichuku asked you about the diaspora vote. Could you name 3 countries in Africa and any 2 outside of Africa where diaspora voting took place in their last general elections?
Thank you, Prof. For this progressive realization of the Article 38 rights, I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Commission has done some work, and we have 12 countries. And within Africa, South Africa, where I've just returned from, I think I got that information from where the Consular General there was voting, diaspora voting in South Africa. Tanzania, our neighbor here. I think Rwanda. Surprisingly, if I may add, I hope you are not limiting me to the 3. Even our Southern Sudan, with all the challenges they are going through in terms of the conflict situation. Outside our continent, we have Canada, United States, and we have not left the European continent behind either. Germany is one of those countries where our diaspora brothers and sisters participated in the vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You did say that you come from the north, you come from a marginalized community. Can you tell us one of the solutions that the 2010 Constitution came up with, and whether, at least economically, and how it has been implemented so far?
Thank you, Prof. Just to give you a bit of a background, when we were growing up, and I was little, my uncle resided in Eldoret. My mother used to come, being a single mother, she used to come to see my uncle, her brother. And when we traveled from Turkana, in those days we were using the lorries. Sometimes you are hitchhiking on these transit goods going to Southern Sudan, and it will bring you to Kitale. Then from there, that's when you see matatus, you know, and you see buses, and you see nice shops and stuff like that. So it used to be a popular stereotype, or maybe I can just say it's jokes. Whenever Turkanas arrive in Kitale, the Matatu people at the stage, they'll be joking with them, calling them, Lokone, you know, Turkana, you're coming, where are you going? Hello, Alosi. They will say, the Turkanas will be like, Alosi, Kenya. Like, we are going to Kenya. So we have come from Turkana, we are going to Kenya. So later on, when I became a bit mature and understood the geography of Kenya, I realized actually Turkana is in Kenya geographically. But even then, having confirmed that we are there geographically, but when you look at the conditions in Turkana, the poverty, schools, I mean, from class 1 to 4, I was learning under acacia tree. This is not a joke. And the beauty part of it is when the wind blows and the weather changes, then you have an opportunity to run home, because, you know, when you're young, you don't like school that much. But see, we grew up under those difficult circumstances. And so the Catholic Church was actually our kind of de facto government, because it's the one that was providing us with basic services, education, health, relief food. So, but something significant happened in 2010, and the new constitution ushered in devolution, decentralization of government. And with decentralization of government, power, resources, I think for us, sometimes we tend to joke among ourselves and say, you know, this is Turkana's independence hour. This is our independence time. This is the time now we're beginning to see what freedom is. Freedom from, you know, the basic needs, freedom from hunger, the right to expanding access to basic education. So with devolution and the first phase, we've had tremendous progress in Turkana. Even if you don't talk about tangible projects, for example, just the sheer number of Turkanas who are employed alone and accessing a salary and are able to support their extended families, so that even during drought, they are able to cushion them. That alone is very significant. But with the county government, where I served for 6 years, both under the first governor and the second governor, we've put in place structures, the county integrated development plan.
Thanks for all that. Because of time.
Yes.
Constitutionally, what's the prescription that the Constitution put in place for marginalized community, not just Turkana, all marginalized communities in Kenya, and how has it been implemented so far?
Of course, in terms of, I was just giving a specific example for how devolution, of course, that decentralization of the government and resources has made improvements in those marginalized areas. And for me, I think that's the most actually significant. But there are also certain rights in the Bill of Rights that recognize the rights of these minorities and marginalized groups. And that's why, for example, then, the rights to political participation. We also have affirmative action. For example, the revenue sharing formula takes into account that aspect of marginalization in the allocation of resources. So the revenue sharing formula, but there's also the affirmative action fund, which is meant to bring those marginalized areas to some level.
What's the name of that affirmative action fund? It's okay.
I cannot remember the exact wording, but I know there's the affirmative action fund. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ethokon. We have enjoyed this time with you. We appreciate the robust engagement and we've even overshot our time. And thank you for allowing us that privilege. We asked for memoranda to be given to us about you. We didn't get any from Turkana, and we haven't gotten any from any other part of the country. And so we will let you go.
Thank you.
And maybe invite you when we receive something like that. Do you have any question for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think not really a question, but to sincerely thank the panel for giving me an opportunity to have this kind of interactive dialogue with you. But more importantly, to give me a chance, to stand a chance to serve this country and to make it a better place for us and the future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Every dream is valid, and we wish you very well. Please remember to pick your documents, and there's a bottle of water there. You didn't use it. You might find it helpful after this. Blessings to you, and wish you success. Thank you.